needs to take.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
Good, that was a good way to
All
put
right.
it.
That's okay.
Good morning.
Sunday had a great time worshiping my dog too.
I appreciate your
Willingness.
your willingness to come meet before your employment hearing this morning. Kind of-
Well, here's the deal, Pat. We don't have to come the last week in March.
That's right.
Okay.
So that's why we're here.
So
I thought that was
I
way
just
here.
wanted to kind of continue on our conversation from last time about the budget, give you some updates and kind of, give you some more information to help us look at the situation and make some decisions, hopefully, or come up with some ideas to continue on our review. So once again, I just show you over the last 10 years the fund balance and where it's been and where we've really been over the last 4 years with the fund balance. And I show you this again because this was, I sent you all the review from Fitch and their latest rating of our school district, and they did downgrade us, unfortunately, from an A+ to an A. Still not, we're still an A, so I'm still proud of that, but one of the several factors, economy, Duke, but also the fund balance
We need to
played.
increase the fund balance and get
Yes,
it back to
ma'am.
an A+.
Yes, ma'am. So
Thank
I
you.
just show you that that's certainly been something we've been cognizant of, and we've been using it strategically to help offset some of the expenses, but just wanted to point that out to you again.
Duke's gas plant, we hope will
We hope,
have
yeah.
a positive
And I'm
impact as
hoping
well.
the hospital, when it starts paying property taxes, will start having some impact too, so. So just to recap last time, we used the governor's budget for forecasting. And in our forecast, remember, we're forecasting a reduction of about 400 students, so the increase from the governor's proposed budget would only be about 427,000. So if we just take how we're forecasting the year end to be, and we're just doing some assumptions here on how we're getting to our numbers, you add that 427,000 to the year end forecast of revenue for this year, you would come up with about $115 million in revenue for next year. And we do the same for the expenses. We just took the year end proposed forecasted expenses for this year, and then we added in what we determined was that line item from the governor, the 2.4 million for salary allocation. And that's how I got to that decrease, or the deficit of about 3.6, 3.7 million. So just want to recap that, how I got to that number. So what did we learn since the last meeting? Well, when we got through, Ms. Himmel had some conversation with FADS, and then I also finally got detailed the governor's budget, so we did learn that that line item in there for the 2.4 million is not new salary allocation dollars, it's to sustain the current ones. So that's good, where we don't have to actually plug in that big number for an additional expense. It's only merely to keep us whole with this year's salary expense. So once we got the detail of it, that was some good news. Although remember now, you just have to face the fact that we have to look at how much money to put aside for certain type of salary increases for the following year, for the FY15 year, if we didn't put that back. So once we change that assumption, the impact is a deficit of about $1.9 million.
That's a lot better.
Yes, but remember now, I just want to preface it by saying that does not take into account any type of reserves for FTE change, for Duke Energy, or any type of fund balance. I would like to see an initiative where we start putting dollars aside to bring back the fund balance to a healthy state. We could put a plan together over several years. We allocate, a certain amount of dollars to get us back to, I know Ms. Bryan always likes that $5 million number in the fund balance to bring it back to that healthy number. So remember, that 1.9 million deficit is only for operations. It does not create reserves, nor does it take into account the salary allocation dollars that potentially you're going to have to look at for increases next year. So any questions about what this number
Can
represents?
you just take what you just said,
Mhm.
that last sentence, and just, can you repeat that?
The $1.9 million deficit.
You say, keep in mind the 1.9.
Keep in mind that does not address reserves for FTE shortfall, the Duke Energy impact, that if we continue to have that impact again, it does not take into account any set aside to increase the fund balance, nor does it take into account any type of negotiated raises next year with unions.
So,
Question.
Okay?
Now, what that does include though is the step raises for our support staff,
Those are the contract obligated things
Those
we
are
have to have,
contract.
but
okay?
And about how much is that one?
altogether about 600,000.
Say that again, Sam.
It
This,
has your contracted obligated step increases in there,
So
but nothing in addition to that.
The formula base that we've talked about now allows us then to, when we do get to the point then of trying to figure out what that might be, it becomes just a line item that we then negotiate and becomes, and then it trickles down through instead of kind of the old methodology.
Correct. Okay, any questions so far? All right. So how are we addressing that $1.9 million shortfall? Well, we've been looking at our staffing at the schools based on FTE reductions and staffing plans out there. And if we were able to hit the number that we're looking at right now, it would be about a $1.5 million deficit, a decrease to expenses to help address that situation. That's merely from the shortfall of the 400 and some odd students out in the schools. One of the ideas is to suspend the secondary 2-mile ridership. That would save about 100,000. And I had some, the impact is minimal. I mean, you're looking at middle schools, probably around 40 kids each middle school. The highest impact was Citrus High, and I think those were like 80 kids it would impact. So you're looking at somewhere between, a couple percent each school, not very big numbers.
Is that
The
include,
impact.
it's secondary only, no
Just
elementary?
secondary, not elementary. The number for total, if you included elementary, would be about 500,000, but we've carved out, we didn't want to do the elementary, we're just looking at secondary only.
And in the
Lecanto schools has no effect because everyone that goes to the Lecanto complex is outside the 2-mile ridership.
and in the meantime, Ms. Farmer's gonna give us a map of where those kids are coming from.
All right. I just know that the other districts that have done that are putting busing back in. We don't have sidewalks. We're very rural, and I think safety probably is more of an issue than anything else for the busing. Didn't we talk about doing it 1 mile at one time?
We've talked about 2-mile, 1 mile, we've had several conversations.
And we can break both of those down, but like I said, Ms. Farmer's giving us a map on where the kids are coming from.
Once again, we're throwing out there, and we've spoken with all the elementary principals, suspending the swim program, suspending the band uniform allocation. We did that somewhat this year on a modified basis. We would recommend suspending it again for next year.
Mr. Clark, may I explain that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Years ago, we would give the school, like the high school, $35,000 this year, and that was on a rotation for 7 schools, high school, middle school. Several years ago, after we realized what was going on with that piece, we took that $35,000 and broke it down every year for all 7 schools, the 3 high schools and the 4 middle schools. So the high schools may be getting $7,000 or $8,000 each year, and the middle schools were getting a couple thousand each year. So we've met with the principals and talked to them because this isn't $35,000 for one lump sum per year. So if we suspend that, they may not get new T-shirts or something this year, but they were all, especially at the high school level, they do a lot of fundraising for the band uniforms and band instruments, so they felt like they could sustain that for this year. And we've already taken away the athletic piece of it a couple years ago. Okay?
Yeah.
That we don't buy the uniforms, we don't,
Right, and they're having to sustain more of the allocation for fees for the referees and umpires at the schools, and middle schools are now funding their trips out of county for athletics, so we've been little by little starting to.
Do you need one of these?
Sure, I like that.
I make sure everybody's well entertained.
So the other thing is too, we're looking at is suspending or ending the allocation to Avid from the general fund. Now keep in mind, Race to the Top sustains the majority of it. The general fund does allocate about $50,000 for Avid. That pays for a lot of your tutors. The majority of that goes to all your tutors. So we've been talking to principals about looking at bringing in tutors on a volunteer basis, not a paid basis. So that.
And I'll add to that also, many of the school districts, this is really for the tutors and the mentors. Many school districts do not pay for their volunteers and the mentors. And we've also talked to the high schools and the schools getting high school honor students to be some of the mentors and the tutors, because they need,
It's a great idea.
they need some service hours, so those kind of things. So it's not that we're just dropping this and not doing anything with it. We've also spoken to the Education Foundation about, once Mark and them come up with a plan to help fund some of this if we have to go back.
It's a road trip.
If we used high school, those students' transportation, does that become an issue?
Well, we would use it with their feeder schools and/or we'll figure that out.
And we already kind of do that with
We're doing that
Peter.
We're
right
doing that some.
Or we-
have some
okay.
doing that now, they're going to their peer
Bless
counseling
you.
class. So we're doing some of that.
Okay.
Transport.
And I think there's a growing interest and more people coming into the mentoring tutoring, because I spoke with some people last week who said, what can we do? And so I got in touch with some people here at the District Service Center.
Okay.
So the other thing is we just realized, and you'll see it tomorrow, I think it comes in front of you, but a savings on our wide area network of about $100,000 on the new bid.
That's just
That
outstanding.
was good, yes. And actually, we got more service out of that, more bandwidth. So that was a very good savings, we realized. So just these alone represent about 1.8 million, so we're close to that 1.9 with these recommendations here.
Why is the swimming program always on the bubble?
Why is it on the bubble?
Always.
Well, that's one of those ones that we speak to the principals, and they're willing to suspend that program to basically keep more time, the kids more in school for instructional time. That's just one of those ones that they look at that they can do away with.
What was the target group for that instruction again?
Third grade.
Yeah, basically you need it 3 months.
It's not really swim, it says swim, but it's more water safety.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, 3 months is
Yeah, you're right.
third grade.
Well, the problem is, there are students who don't have swimming instructions and don't know how to swim. We live in Florida. We've had children in this county die from drowning, so this is preventing any more children from drowning.
It has prevented, we haven't had a drowning since this implementation.
No, but the number 2 killer in the country of students under the age of 16 is drowning.
Well, not looking at just our situation, just Citrus County.
Well, I think that, I don't know that we have the data to show how many we saved as a result of them
Well,
learning.
no, I'm
it.
not asking how many we saved, I'm asking how many have drowned since the implementation of the program. She was just making the statement that we haven't had any drowns since the implementation. of the program.
I can't, I'm not gonna say for sure, but I don't remember any. I remember before this program started, of a couple kids having drowned. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that the teachers have talked to the principals about suspending it from the 3rd grade especially. And we know that,
Third grade
and I don't have the numbers, but we know that a lot of the drownings are way before 3rd grade.
Yes.
So if it's something that, we need to put back in there or suspend for a year and put it back, maybe we look at a younger age.
Well,
group.
that's my
It's more of a
concern.
safety program than it is teaching swimming.
If we're gonna, I never understood why 3rd grade was the magic target for training for that anyway,
Third grade's the magic target for
for a
everything.
lot of things.
Yeah.
And-
But I think historically, the reason is because it would have required a great deal more staff if we did pre-K.
Mhm.
Because you're,
Okay.
it's kind of, yes, pre-K would have been the better age, but then, 3rd graders,
They'll listen to you.
yeah, 3rd graders were, again, probably more age appropriate for the number of staff that we have at the grade.
And
So
I,
everything that we have going on in 3rd grade, I would think that if you just moved it down 1 grade, to 2nd grade.
I'm still back on where is the need? When you're looking at data and driving decisions based on data, we need more information.
well, I think the data first would be is that you live in Florida and you know that the number 2 killer in the country is students under the age of 16 and drowning. So that in of itself is a data-driven reason. The other thing I would say is I totally understand the financial picture we're under, but to say that the need is not there to educate
Oh, I didn't
students
say
to
that.
that, I would be concerned with.
No, I
The other
definitely
piece
did
that
not
I
say
would
that.
say is that when you talk to the physical education teachers, they will tell you that the number of students they have that do not have water experience and the abilities is very, well, then Ms. Balfour, then if you were saying that, I'm not sure. You're saying you want to make a data decision, but you just talked to that, you said
My
you know
point
that.
is you're giving me national information.
Okay.
I know, I'm again looking for, I'm not trying to nitpick, I'm not trying to pull this out as a negative. Staff's giving us some ideas. The driving discussion was a point for Mrs. Deutschman. I'm not saying that a swim program is a bad thing. I'm definitely not.
Mhm.
I'm looking for reasons to implement it in third grade. And data, national data, again, when I'm looking at dollars to be spent on students in this district, that has to be my focus. National data is very important.
Oh, we could get you, if you want the data, I'm sure that I can show you that Florida's even worse than the national.
And may I say that
Third
Mrs.
grade.
Deutschman's efforts in the driving safety have paid off.
That,
Tremendously.
That's huge.
And-
That's huge.
We don't know how many kids we
Right.
save because they're still alive.
Well, no, and I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for information to, again, we've got to come up with some decisions here.
Well, let me.
And I'm not picking on this one.
Well, I am, because this is not just a today issue. This has been something that has been on our list every year since we've had the first budget shortfalls back in
4 years ago.
2009. So I'm saying, why does this continue to be on the bubble every single year, Ms. Balfour? This is not a new discussion, and we've had PE teachers come in here, and it's more inclusive of just students. They have a certification that they have to go through. They have to maintain a certification every year. If they don't teach swimming, something about they either lose a certification or they don't take the test or whatever. It's more complicated than just taking some third graders on a bus over to Whisper and trying to teach them how to swim. And we have never had anybody make a complaint about the swimming program. So to have it on the list just to make the assumption that it'll be, okay, we'll just add it to our list,
Yeah.
I don't appreciate that. I think
Well-
we need to have that as a number of other options. And we need to decide whether or not the swimming program is something we want to stick with it and be done with it and take it off the budget. Because I'm tired of having this conversation every
But-
year for 4 years.
And we're putting up ideas because we are certainly trying to, as once again we've said, least impact in the classroom. We're trying to find ideas, and we've been through this for 4 years, presenting ideas to the board to effectively reduce the budget to create an increase in our fund balance, not to use our fund balance to the extent that we have. So we're trying to find ideas to bring to you to have discussion that's not going to impact the classroom. They're very limited anymore.
Well,
Anymore, everything is very limited, that we're going to start having some impact on classrooms, and these are just some of the ones that we're trying to say, these are the least impact into the classroom.
This is another piece that we were also gonna take to the foundation. I'm trying to come up with a list of programs that I can take to the foundation and say, if we suspend this out of part one, can you all fund these programs?
how much
and I'll
money do
certainly
they
add that.
have in their savings account?
It's less than it used to be, but it's healthy. It's healthy, let me tell
So,
you.
Mr. Blocker, when we talk about impact on the classroom, we also have to understand that we have, how many less students? 415
Correct.
less students. So there's gonna be a reduction in staff, we understand that. At the same time, though, we had a discussion last time about this budget-based student allocation is equivalent to which year?
I think it was 04 is what we looked at,
Okay.
and I actually have some other information to show you equivalency with
Okay,
FTE.
that's what we wanted
Yeah.
to look at, not only that, but the staffing plan. Because if our FTE and numbers are about what they were in 2004, 2005, or is that when?
Base student allocation, FTE, and
What
I'll
was the
show
FTE?
you, actually it looks comparable to the 97, 98 year.
Okay.
You can look at, here's the graph, and it goes back, and that's some 15 years ago, actually, I looked again this morning, probably 96, 97 was even closer, but
Since that time.
So since
we've
what is-
added-
what's happened right here? Forest Ridge, 2000. Renaissance, 2006. The Planning and Growth Management Department, 2006. Central Ridge Elementary, 2007. And then, of course, class size, that's the other bit. We've had a tremendous amount of change in this school district based on all the students that we had. Now we're back to levels from 97.
Since that time, though, we had SAI money, which, do we still get that
Yes.
in the same amount that we've always?
It's all based on the students and the FTE.
Right.
So the allocations have certainly been up over the years based on inflation and everything else that they have to account for. But if you want to look straight FTE, you're basically back 15 years ago. And you brought on all these schools.
Yeah, we've added a lot of support staff, but we've added a lot of administrative staff. We have deans. Doesn't mean that it was a bad thing, but we've added and added. We've added an assessment specialist. We've added, since I've been here since 1998, deans at all the high schools, assessment specialists at all the schools,
APs at your elementary schools.
APs at the elementary school, added APs at some of the high schools. We have added a huge number of teachers' aides, huge number. I think over time, we even had that year where we got the extra money and we hired all these extra teachers' aides.
That was the air money that we didn't.
Yeah, but I mean, so I think there's other ways, other than,
No,
there's other things I think we need to look at, and I think our staffing plan, especially our smaller schools, I was talking to Mrs. Semmel about this after our last meeting.
Mhm.
You know, maybe we need to look at it differently, instead of per student, we need to look at it maybe per instructional unit. Have you looked at that?
As far as the.
Administrative versus classroom instruction.
We have a staffing plan based on student enrollment.
Right.
There's a given that there's at least a certain number of administrators, support staff, secretarial staff, all that, if you had no kids or you had 300 kids. But the PE teachers are based on a number of instructional units. It's one for every 25 instructional units, which is a little odd. So,
I think we did take a look at that, at least that ratio, and in that ratio, we could not reduce it. I remember several years ago, we brought to you about reducing PE teachers at elementary and essentially reducing the 9 elementary schools that have 2 elementary PE teachers and reducing to 1 with a teacher's aide. And that didn't make it through.
But that was because of requirements for PE
No.
then and now.
No, this was just a couple years ago, we presented this to you, and the requirements haven't changed.
Well, still the requirements are much more now than they used to be. If you go back 15 years, you go out and play ball, but now you have a whole curriculum that's built around this, so.
but we decided too that we didn't want to decrease any instructional units.
I'm just saying, we presented these ideas, we
Right.
presented the media specialist idea to you for several years.
We were gonna look at that again this year too, because it was given back to them as a flexible unit.
They were talking about changing that job description, more technology/media than just media specialist.
I think the question on that still remains is that some schools have a media technology TOSA, and then some have a media, and then some people have a technology. And I know some of that, they're using their Title I funds to do that, which we can't supplant the Title I funds, but the question I think becomes is, one way or the other, we then still have schools that have more than one of those parties in there.
We've, executive staff and ed services and HR has gone out and they've met with all the principals. They've talked about the number of students and they've talked about giving back to us about their needs, what they feel like they need to survive for next school year. So we've got that back. In fact, they just finished it on Friday, so we're consolidating the list. We'll be going over that to see what kind of changes they want to make. Which probably is not, here's the deal, it's probably not giving us anything, we're going to have to go back out there and talk again.
What you want to give up.
And are you looking for a consensus from the people you're talking with, or just for individual input?
You mean from the principals?
Yeah.
Right now it was individual, because they met with every school, some of their staff, and then they brought us back based on number of students. And Ms. Starchman did bring up about the number of administrators versus instructional staff, because we also have to deal with, different types of assessments now, not assessments, but evaluations and those and requirements from the state. So we are looking at that at the high school, middle school, and elementary level.
Did you bring us a staffing plan last time? Trying to find it. Was it last?
I don't think it was in the last package.
Time 4?
You mean for grade level or for
Which
schools?
are you looking for, elementary, middle, or higher?
Oh,
Just for clarification, because I've been looking here also.
Some on my case,
Thank
Susie can get it.
Approved staffing plans, the 6 of them?
National leading death is number 3 is drowning in Florida. The number 1 is student neglect, or is children neglect, and the number 1 of that is drowning. So the number 1 in Florida is drowning.
What age?
No, it doesn't break it down that way.
I just asked.
Well, if it's, you understand the point for the.
Well, I would say that I can tell you, having been around aquatics and swimming for many years, the younger students will often, by their knowledge of swimming, have an impact on being able to actually provide life-saving skills and savings should an incident take place with a younger child.
please don't regard my questions as a negative, a blanket negative on the program. I just want to know.
But I think we have to be careful when we say that we're data-driven.
Well, here.
We've got to be careful to say, we also have to be common sense too. And that's what we have to balance that, is to say, absolutely we look at data. But then when we have programs, it's like, for example, we've had Math Field Day on here for $5,000. If you said to me, show me data that shows that Math Field Day has a positive impact on students, I don't think we'd be able to realistically say that we could find data that does that. I think this is one of those programs that for the dollar amount, we have to balance to say, are we going to support it, or are we saying, and this was, I think, a valid question to say, is that the responsibility of the school board? Now, this school board, long before me, had said that with a community that has 65% free and reduced lunch, that was something they were willing to take on. And I appreciate that, knowing the statistics. But that doesn't mean that it is not still a valid conversation about, do we have the money? But I do think that it becomes difficult when we see that year after year, the board has kind of said how they felt about that.
And I definitely understand his frustration, because like she stated, it's within 4 years, she threw the number 4 out, that this has come to the table. And I definitely recognize that frustration, and it's a $20,000 line item. So looking at the broad impact when you're dealing with a budget the size that we have, it is a minimal amount when you look at the size of the budget. Recognizing that staff's focus to bring things to the table that will not have a direct impact on student achieving in that classroom setting, I understand their focus and what's driving them to put that on the agenda time and time again. I get that. And again, the questions become, when I look through the lens that I have, my kids were involved in swimming too. You mentioned swimming. I get that value. And what is one life worth? You know, I understand that, those concepts. It just goes back to where can we cut? And there's always going to be a situation where there's regret when we have to cut. With a personal budget, a business budget, a school budget, anytime you have to make those tough decisions, there's going to be some regret. And I think the lens that we need to look through goes back to impacting we have to educate our students in Citrus County. And with these tough times, that has to be our focus. What decisions that we make today will have a negative impact on learning in the classroom? And that's all that I'm trying to bring to the table. I love the program. I think it's value. Sure, it has a value. Can I make a decision just on that information that I've been given? Is third grade at the appropriate time? Are we getting the most bang for the buck? You know, I mean, there are a lot of questions surrounding it. The frustration that she feels, and those that have served for years on the board and see this come time and time again to the board's attention, I get that frustration. I totally do, but
keep in mind, one of the things that we've also said, and this is not necessarily a criticism to this, but it does go back to these items, is you can try and find a bunch of change with these small programs, but if you are still millions off from where you need to be, you got to be careful that you don't take everything away in those smaller programs with the assumption to say, well, we got to cut and save, when we're really not getting farther down the road. You know, $5,000 and $20,000 type items don't get us to $2 million unless we have a lot of them, and we don't have a lot of them.
Even Mr. Kendi, when it comes up, it always says swim program. Well, in reality, it's a water safety program.
It is, and that's exactly, in fact, I think it's referred to as a water safety. I think that when we look at those programs like that, like Math Field Day, it isn't to me as much as to say, yes, I think we do categorize those types of items as you have, Mr. Blocker, with budgeting. But I do think that it's important then as a board that we say, if we still feel that those programs have value, is to go, and I think the Educational Association is a very appropriate, like Math Field Day. This is about student safety. This is truly about, I believe, something that we are doing a lot in our schools, and this again, Ms. Balfour, isn't directed at you as much as it is. Safety has become a huge amount of money that we are spending in our state in the idea that our schools are unsafe, and we're spending millions of dollars for things that happened in other parts of the country, tragedies that happen. And we are spending all kinds of money doing that. And yet something that we know is the #1 killer in our state for young people, something we know common sense-wise is huge. We don't think a lot to say, well, we probably don't need to do that. But we will spend, I can tell you, we'll spend locks. We'll spend $30,000 in locks this year.
Right.
And that's where I say, you have to understand, you look at that one line item, you gotta be careful to simply say, oh, well, we gotta cut something. Because the bigger picture is often that it is an emotional item to say, again, we have, how much do we have in safety that the state's putting down to us this year? On student safety, I think they did 100,000 or something last year in categoricals.
I mean, as far as
They have a categorical again this year.
It's a couple 100,000.
A couple 100,000 that they're gonna force us to do in something that arguably we don't have a problem in our district. But a problem that we recognize locally, that this board has for a long time. That's what is frustrating about when you sit here with that, because the state is telling us what is the safety concerns.
Don't misunderstand my passion for wanting students to be able to swim. I think that's a misperception that you're gleaning from the dialogue here. I definitely want every single child born in the world to learn how to swim before when they can crawl, they should be in that swimming pool learning how to swim, because they can crawl toward a pool. I think we're splitting hairs when it comes to when that instruction's you're getting the most bang for your buck, whether it's a program funded by the Citrus County School District, the YMCA, any other private entity that chooses to use that as a mission. I feel that we as a board need to look at the options that they're bringing to the table here. And again, I know that your philosophy is looking at smaller, your thought of picking up the pennies and the change. But when you're looking at a personal budget, if you deal with the smaller pieces that don't impact those kids in the classroom, again, for me, that's my goal. I want to try to, when I make a decision to cut budgets, I want to make sure that decision is going to have the least impact on our mission to educate students.
And Ms. Balfour, we've done that. That's what we're trying to say, is we've spent years now in reducing funding, and our mission and our statement has been very loud to say, we want cuts, we want reductions that do not impact or have the least impact in classrooms. That's been what we've always said.
I'm not saying
Just
something
because
we're
Mr.
looking at.
I'm sorry.
You're talking about impact in the classroom, this does have impact, I know you
And I
know
agree.
with that, you mentioned, impact in the classroom, and it does have impact in the classroom because it's an awareness, just like the program that Pat got involved with the driving, it's an
Oh, it's
awareness
huge.
of the necessity for safety in the water as Pat is safety in the car.
Well, the other thing is, there's certain things that make Citrus County Schools unique. One of them is our attention to the need for students, regardless of whether it's math, reading, or safety. And we've been very careful to preserve the arts. We've been very careful to preserve a lot of programs that other school districts have eliminated because of budget cuts. And we've said those are essential. They're essential to who we are and how we do business. And so we've said that about the swimming program. We've talked about moving it every other year. We've talked about doing it just for kids who don't know how to swim. We've had some other discussions about how to reduce the cost of that program without eliminating it. So my only the reason for bringing it up is it's constantly on the list.
It's a recurring theme, yes.
It's the
it is.
theme,
Mhm.
so can we go on to staffing plans?
Now, before we
I
go
agree
there,
with that.
I am putting that on the list for the Education Foundation to see
It's
if we
great.
can take it from part one.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we have, and the board knows, that budget has been cut because of the way we
That's right, it used to be
changed
more.
some of the.
Oh, it used to be much more.
30,000 or
We will add that to our.
Thanks, that's a great idea, to just encourage the program to be funded just from a different pot. Thank you for that.
Just the change that we've seen over the last few years, so I point that out to you if there's any conversation you wanna have about any of that, so.
But
Thanks.
I don't think that we want to assume that we're saying this is okay.
I'm not assuming
You
anything.
just.
I'm getting
We're just
information.
talking.
I can certainly,
Well, I don't want you to say that, well, you guys saw it, you didn't say anything, so, you know, we would have had to move forward with those.
I will not move forward until it gets blessed by the board. But I do point out that, you know, we have grown significantly in brick and mortar over the last 15 years. Is there anything we want to talk about with that?
Shut them down, shut them all down.
Did you all read Chronicle this morning that
Yes.
Pope John Paul has been ordered to be closed? So, that's interesting, yeah, they had a student population requirement of 300 and they couldn't get there. We have 2 schools, it says less than 450, actually, what's their student population right now?
They're around 330.
330, and they had at one point been up in the 400s.
Susie, are both the small schools at 330?
Somewhere around there, 350.
330.
330.
350 is Full City, and I think 334, 336 is Homosassa.
Okay. You know, I think we need to look again, I mean, unfortunately, but the cost of administrative and instructional for that number of students, I mean, Steve Garley used to point this out to me all the time. Every time we talk to him. Y'all don't know remember Steve Garley was a principal.
I remember
It's a
him.
primary
He's the
school.
one, he is the one, I digress, he is the one that implemented the swimming program.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So anyway, Steve Garley used to say, you know, it costs a lot more to run some of these other schools than my school. Why don't you just give me the money that I'm supposed to get for my kids and let me just run my school and leave me alone? Because it would cost significantly more. We talked about this last year with the Renaissance Center, and that's one of the reasons why we reduced the staff and the administration at the Renaissance Center, because the cost per student was exorbitantly high compared to mainstream classroom.
And it still is.
Still is, but, I mean, but I think someone said, I think the Renaissance, I talked to Miss Eaton the other day, she said it's like a 2-to-1 ratio instead of a,
Well, it may even be more than that.
yeah.
Because
to
we may
go
say
to
that
school.
there may be 90 kids there, but on a daily basis, maybe only 30 or 40 show up.
Yeah, that's true, but they also require twice as much work. So she said for, you know, for every one,
So I'm saying, if you're looking at staffing the Renaissance,
You might as well double.
administratively,
is what she said.
is heavily staffed too.
Yeah. So anyway, so when we look at the small elementary schools, I mean, I know that in many districts, they've talked about closing them because
They
of the
have
high
closed.
administrative costs and the maintenance costs and all that. And I don't think I want to go down that road because I think hopefully we're on a better economic path in the future, and this is hopefully going to be the end of these painful conversations, but
Well, and I understand that, we've been hoping it, but we're hitting the declining enrollment is really hitting us hard
Right.
to it, as well as the economy. So
Right.
if we'd had the same enrollment, I think we'd have been fine, we'd have been out of the woods, but that's what's really hurting us as well.
Right. So, I don't know, Ms. Himmel, we talked about this the other day. Have you given any more thought as to restructuring how the staffing plan could work?
When they met with, the 2 smaller schools, one of the principals said it's getting harder and harder to meet the needs of all the kids with the staffing because, you know, they now share the curriculum toast, correct?
Correct.
They, you know, they share that and,
ESC specialists, do they share?
and they're still looking at sharing another position. So he just made the comment that it's getting harder and harder to meet the needs.
Well, when you
Like
have
our
one,
expectation of what we expect them to do.
And they both did, I mean, they
Right,
both
right.
expressed that same concern, they can't provide the services at the level that is needed based on how they're being staffed.
how does a school with 1,100 kids and one guidance counselor meet the needs of their students when you have a school with 330 kids and one guidance counselor? I mean, how is that not a complete imbalance? You know, and the office staff, you have 4 to 1. So the office staff is more essential than a guidance counselor for the number of students that are attending that school. Health room, you know, everybody's got one. One's got to deal with 1,106 kids, sick kids at one time, the other one's only got 300.
The small schools are very, very costly. I mean,
I know.
it's,
But some of those are even, you know, it's, take the health room. You gotta have somebody there,
Right, I know.
you know, so, yeah, it's not cost effective to have one for 300 kids when one can obviously serve 800. But, so some of those, even like the guidance counselor, we've talked about those things. We have shared an ESE specialist at the 2 small schools. We share the reading, TOSA at the 2 small schools.
and we're sharing them with Crescent Renaissance. I
Yes.
mean, that doesn't
Yes,
work
we
out
are.
with that either. I mean,
So
And
we
those are
try to
closer
do some of
proximity.
those, yeah, but some things you get to, like a bookkeeper, somebody answer the phones. You know, you almost have to have at least one person to do some of that stuff.
Right.
I know we've had discussion on this before, but if a school like Homosassa was suspended and absorbed back into the others, are those all savings that would then take place?
well, certainly you would save operationally, administrative. I mean, the teachers are gonna have to be able to serve the kids. Now, you may not have to have them all per se, because you're gonna have, depending on how they fit and where they go. Support staff, debatable, because you already have a bookkeeper, you already have a principal, you know, so those things you'd say, those are the admin costs, so, busing, so, yes, you would save custodial, everything. I mean, the only thing you're really gonna move over is like
You'd have to bus them
teaching.
out of there.
Hmm?
There'd be more busing, because you'd have to bus them out of there.
Yeah, but not every bus is full that serves every elementary school.
Yeah, and
How many students are there from Alzheimer's?
60, I believe it was, yeah, so if you back out the 60 from the 330, you're looking at 270 kids that are actually zoned for that school.
270?
Where did all those people go?
I don't know if they've ever
It's
been
never
more than
here.
that, I mean, since I've been here, it's always been around
There's
60.
60 out of zones go in there.
Yeah.
That's unreal.
Where are the 60 from?
Mostly Crystal River and Rock Crusher area. And, you know, some is because grandparents live out there, and
Mhm.
mom and dad take them to grandparents in the morning, and they go to the school.
You know, one time,
Various reasons.
there was a conversation about building a full-size elementary school in Sugar Mill Lake.
Yeah.
20 acres, we own 20 acres.
I was gonna say this, you still own the acreage.
Yeah,
We're talking about a K to 8.
Well, if you remember when.
Yeah.
We're talking about a K to 8 there.
46 that, or that,
They wanted their own
I mean,
school.
we were slated in the 5-year plan to be already starting to plan for that school, we've just taken a nosedive in enrollment.
Was there any more discussion too about if we were to not try to make classroom size amendment?
You know, I asked Ms. Swain to look into that, and we budget so tight now and do she does such a good job on managing those units. We wouldn't say, but maybe 3 to 5 units on top of that.
If we use district average.
Yeah.
Well,
as
that's
a-
$150,000.
But
That's more than a swimming
when
pool.
we say that, the caveat I would.
But you're gonna have some penalty on top of that, so your net's not gonna be
Let
that.
me say that that's what we did last year, and we were very fortunate. Ms. Swain will tell you, there was probably, at least half our elementary schools had no room for another kindergarten. One showed up, we would have had to add a unit. We were that way across the board in 3rd grade. So we say, she worked diligently last year to get to that point where we were only 3 units over what we would have been staffed anyway, but that could have, 8 kids in the wrong
Yeah.
place, that could have been 8 different units, the way we, as tight as we were last year. So when we say that, that's last year, that doesn't mean, that's what I would caution you, even with, when Mr. Blocker shows you the reduction we can look at with staff. That's a target goal. We have,
Right.
we don't know how many kids are gonna fail algebra 1, I don't know how many level 1, level 2 readers are gonna need intensive reading yet. So there's a lot of things that lie outside of that. The things that we can do is address the support structure, like you.
And some of the things, we get very creative in the schools, and principals have been very creative in how they're teaching multi-age kids, so some of that is how they.
Well, they-
Y'all was her saying.
Yeah, no.
Go ahead, no, go ahead.
Yeah, we have, Mr. Geddes here, and I've asked this question every year. and I know we were trying to move in this direction. For instance, I learned at Citrus High School, they didn't have enough kids, they had 9 kids signed up for physics, and some of the other high schools weren't teaching physics at all, which is insane. So how are we getting to the point where we can have one physics teacher at one of the high schools and have the other 2 schools join in remotely and have a class?
Yeah, you know, we tried that, I believe, with a foreign language class last time. One of the considerations there, Ms. Deutschman, is you still have to have someone supervising those students at the other school. So there's a staff member involved.
Well, it doesn't have to necessarily be a certified instructional staff, couldn't it be a
It could.
paraprofessional that happens to be there and they'll take one block and, I mean, I don't know where the kids were they in a computer lab or where were they? Were they in a designated classroom?
They were in a classroom and
Classroom.
the examples that we did last
And we're
time.
looking at places where we may have to do that for some of our advanced courses that we can't get enough kids in
Right.
for next year.
Rather than not
You
all
know,
of them.
yeah, it's harder in some classes, but again, everything's taught online. You can take PE online now, so we pretty much have at least one lab in every high school now that's doing online courses for letting kids do online courses at the school. Problem with online is we lose FTE for that.
One of the things I know Citrus High did this year, maybe last year, they just taught physics the first semester, so the
Right.
teacher was only a half a year.
Right.
And that's all, it kind of worked out for both of them, that's all he wanted to do, and that's all, it met their schedule, so.
Well, the problem is on the block schedule, sometimes kids can't fit that in their schedule. That's
Is it-
really become the conflict.
Yes.
So they can't do it first term, or they can do it second term, then it's not offered. And I just can't imagine high school's not offering physics when we're all on this STEM program. Everybody has to be a rocket scientist. How could we dare not have physics?
That's right.
Besides, it's a lot of fun to, let me back, I want to ask one.
Matter of opinion.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I wanted to ask one question about Renaissance. Is there not some weighted monies, FTE, that can be applied? Is there
Yeah, they
not
get the same
something
way
you can do?
anybody else did, I mean, remember, they just, they.
I know they do now, but is there not somewhere we could go where we could have something weighted? Because that's a very special
That would
group.
have to be something y'all lobby the legislature to get. I mean, because right now, the weighting is nothing different than what they get.
We don't, there's vocational weighting now.
It's less than
Vocational
one.
used to be weighted more than that, now it's
I know.
less than that. We don't even get, and those
I
are
know that.
programs that, you know, typically you spend more money on with equipment and materials.
But the need is just like an ESC program. You have a need.
And remember, there's only probably 15 to 20 ESC kids out there, the rest are just.
They
So
get
what
it,
we
but I
need
mean,
to do
the
is have
need
the
is
Florida
like an ESC
legislature
program.
come down here and sub in our IB program, and then sub at the Renaissance, and maybe they could see the difference.
Good
You'd
idea.
like Mr. Smith to teach IB?
If you remember last year, we significantly cut back on the staff at Renaissance. We significantly.
How is that working?
I don't think our results are any different. I'll be honest with you, and I've said this before, you know, what those kids need, we can't provide in 6 hours a day.
And the shared resources, I don't think are working either with Crest.
It's just, things are no different as far as, services aren't any worse with that. But Yale's running probably about 30 more students than we were last year at this time, 25, 30 more, with less staff, so. But it's not the Renaissance is not the success that we would want it to be. Transition program, I think, is successful with the kids. The Renaissance, we get a lot of repeat offenders, and they cycle back. We get kids that are staying there for the 4 years.
Well, the success is, as Ms. Bryant points out every time we discuss this, is what Ms. Bryant.
And we've got 14,000 other students that we're protecting,
And you're right, and then every principal will tell you
and those teachers as well.
that those 15 or 20 kids that would come back to their school would probably take down 60
Right.
with them.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right, that from that sense, it is being successful in the fact that you're separate. To really reach those kids, they need counseling and they need services provided that go far beyond the school day that we're not able to get.
But the fact that we've provided another place for them away from our mainstream children
We try.
is phenomenal.
And I'm gonna look into that, see if are there any weighted programs in other states with for special schools like that. And maybe also the sheriff's department could pitch in with some training, some approaches to life.
Here's a good idea.
and camouflage and.
No, that's,
No?
We have superintendent's got some numbers she wanted to
I
share with
just wanted
us.
to share our elementary numbers with you, if you want to jot these down, or because we talked about Homosassa Elementary. Okay, Central Ridge Elementary, I'm gonna give you the current number first, and then I'll give you the projected number.
No, we had those in our thing last year. Oh, they gave it to us in a separate packet. Okay, never mind.
Okay.
I don't wanna write this all.
Central Ridge is 762 currently, projected is 737. Citrus Springs Elementary is 748, projected 734. Chris River Primary is 605, projected 590. Floral City Elementary is currently 361, projected 355. Forest Ridge Elementary is currently 732, their projection is 744. Hernando Elementary is 672, projected at 619. Homosassa is 341, projected at 334. Emirates Primary is 671, projected at 637. Canto Primary is 761, projected at 755.
Used to be one of our smallest
I know,
elementary schools.
and it's got to be one of those.
Wow, that's
I
surprising.
know.
What was that one?
Canto Primary.
Primary used to be small.
Pleasant Grove Elementary is 741, excuse me, 742, but projected at 741, they're flat. And then Rock Crusher is 607, and they're projected at 564.
Did you say Citrus Springs also?
Yeah, Citrus Springs Elementary is 748 to 734.
And I got Miss Wayne making copies for you.
That one,
Oh,
at
okay.
one point, we almost had 1,100.
And one of
Yeah,
the things, if you look
Yes,
at your
right.
staffing plans, one of the things that we're, you can see some schools have dropped from where they have been for years into the next category. So it's one of the things that was, I'll use the word devastating to some schools, but they hadn't realized that their staff would change, their office staff and those things would change based on their staffing point. So
and-
there's,
Below 650, you mean?
yeah, when you hit that below 650, and
But
it,
you know, that didn't make a lot of sense either, because that's 200 students, and you lose one student, and all of a sudden you've lost the
well,
entire.
and we,
We came up with a formula, about 85%.
yeah, we
If they're
tried,
85% or higher, then we'll go back to them and look at their.
and like in Canto Middle School dropped last year, but they did their guidance, instead of their dean, so there was, you know, so that's some of the conversation we have in staffing, what will be the impact of your school based on that cut, that's
But
some
you're
of
right,
the things that we.
Ms. Deutschman, if they drop to 649, then they'll probably stay at the 650, but we were looking at about an 85%.
So it looks like your average is around 675 plus or minus 40 or 50 kids at every elementary school. It's very common, I mean, it's very similar. We have uniform enrollment at every school except for the two small schools.
Correct.
So we probably should only have 2 tracks. We should probably have the regular full-size elementary school track and then the little school track, rather than have all these different formulas that keep bouncing around unless we have a sudden spurt and we go up to like 1,100 kids again.
We have room for them.
No, we
Yeah, we
do.
got empty wings. I
Mhm.
mean, Rock Crusher has got almost like an empty wing in it.
Wow.
Yeah, I can remember walking Citrus Springs Elementary with Trish Douglas trying to convert closets to classrooms because we had so many kids out there one time. Same at Rock Crusher, walking with John Weed trying to find space where we could put remodel to put kids in.
No more.
We're just out of room.
I taught in a portable out there.
And the other thing is too, you remember the changes too, we added the concretables at LaCanto High, we added concretables at Crest, so we've done even more than what this is.
Yeah, that was.
You didn't put the concretables here.
No ma'am, I did not, I'm just pointing that out to you. These were just the big ones. These were the
I'm
big
just
ones.
messing with you.
They were done, I think the concretables were done in 2007, 2008.
I believe so,
I don't know.
in about 2 weeks, I think.
I was here.
How they put 'em up.
For a month.
It was close. More
Well-
than 2 weeks, but it wasn't much more.
I think we need to look at this again. I think we need to have our house-size schools be staffed about half-size as our full-size schools. I mean, I just don't see how we can continue to justify having all the additional staff at those smaller schools, when the workload is half, the student, population is half. Responsibility, or I guess
You
the
say,
time,
you talk about Floral City and Homosassa,
yeah.
because you're getting those other schools are starting to drop down too. Rock Crusher, Crusher Primary.
Well, but there's
Fernando.
still full-size elementary schools where they have 600-700 kids as opposed to 300 kids.
They're dropping into the fives now, I think, if I remember correctly.
Chris River Primary is 590,
Fernando.
565.
And we don't know what the impact of, if Pope John Paul actually does close, we don't know what the impact of that is going to be, whether those students are then going to enroll at Seven Rivers, or they're going to
Chuck
go
has had a few calls this morning.
into public.
And they've got 100, 100 something.
You know, the other thing that we have to be really cognizant of is this voucher
Serving all
bill
elementary.
that's coming before the legislature, which is, I'm assuming is going to pay for tuition at places like Seven Rivers.
I would assume so, yes.
What impact that may have on our enrollment as well, the voucher issue.
And they're heavily recruiting right now.
Tina just sent me Tina Moser from Chuck Dixon's office just sent me the enrollment sheet that I just forwarded to you, board members, and copied you, the assistant superintendents on it. But it also shows capacities in those numbers as well, and individual grade levels numbers, so it does give you some details if you're wanting. But you look at Floral City, you got 70% capacity there, and you look at Homosassa, where was it there? They're 83% capacity, but again, then you have Crystal River Primary's 92% capacity, and Rock Crusher was, I think, the other one you guys were mentioning, and that's 86%. That's probably that whole wing that you're talking about.
What's WTI showing?
WTI, they don't have theirs in the same way because theirs post-secondary, so it doesn't have it that way.
Yeah, the majority of theirs are adults. They got very few K-12 kids.
Right.
Utilization, about 45%.
Yeah, I don't know that.
Yeah, it is. But like Renaissance is 44%.
Have you looked at instructional units instead of student enrollment as far as the ratio of some of these designated, say PE, art, music, and then some of the support staff? Instead of student enrollment as far as the ratios or the requirement?
No, I mean, typically FTE drives all the conversation. Student enrollment is where we make our
Then
allocation.
why do we have PE, art, and music based on the number of instructional units, not based on?
That was an
It's based
old
on-
formula, not
and it was
based on
based
the.
on how they scheduled.
Right,
So
because
based
it was
on
the special
being able to
extra.
get those teachers the planning during the day so that those kids could go into specials. That's how that formula was developed, based on
Is
schedule.
it still accurate?
Well, they use
So you
it,
still
because they got to
using
meet the planning period. That's the other issue.
Yeah, we're still using
So we,
it. And that really hasn't changed a whole lot for anybody over the years.
And there's a couple schools that if we really implemented that, we would add one of those units, and we have not done that.
That's not to say
the
that
numbers
there's not
that
a
Sam
better
just
formula
gave
out
us.
there that we can look at.
And we can break that down for you administratively, and then, there are other instructional units that they use. We can break that down per instructional unit.
And can I ask you too, looking at the funding, looking at the formula for the staffing plan, when you say break it down, I know that a health room attendant, when there's not somebody in that health room at the nurse's station or whatever in need, they're wearing a couple of different hats. So when we're looking at those numbers with the health room attendant at one,
Do our health attendants? I didn't think our health attendants did do multiple tasking.
Well, they'll-
Most of
Well-
them, they're probably entering like emergency card data in
Right.
a computer or something like that.
But that's part of their job. I was gonna say, that's part of their job description, but they don't and do other
I don't know that
duties.
there's ever a time you can walk into a school, there's not somebody in
Yeah, I don't think they're out on the bus ramp or anything.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, yeah.
You know, just looking at day-to-day operation, you know, I'll see them wearing several different hats. But look back to the formula again, we don't have that reflected. So if someone has 2 or 3 different hats that they're wearing in day-to-day obligations.
Every one of our schools has lost and it'll be
They're one
completed this
support
year,
below the
have
staff.
lost 1 support staff
So
member.
we're kind of bare bones
Yeah.
on staff.
Right, because you may have a
From
data and a
what I'm
guidance
hearing from
secretary
you,
combined now.
We're at a bare bones situation in staffing. That's real?
I mean, yeah, we've made the cuts that we're talking, they've already experienced the cuts to the level below them as far as support staff, so now they'll go 1 more below that if we take that support staff. So in other words, say Crystal River's already short, they don't have 3, a bookkeeper, data, and a guidance secretary, they really only have 2. So, if we staffed them, they would end up with 1, which is our numbers below 450.
And you also, I think, need to look at the teachers and the other duties they perform, because it's not just classroom, the teachers are out there for bus duty, they're out doing lunchroom duty, so there are a lot of things that they do in addition to being a teacher.
Correct.
Okay, so you just handed us something that shows that
You wanted to, I think, a hard copy of the enrollment numbers. So-
the elementary staffing plan, this one with all.
Yeah.
So there's a difference, like Rock Crusher has a ratio of 18.5 students per teacher, and some other schools have an average of 23.
Right, no, remember,
Is
K,
that based on ESC population?
well, they do inclusion and everything, so.
Inclusion, okay.
And remember, 4 and 5 is 22 to 1, K3 is 18 to 1.
Right, but as far as an overall school.
Well, and the other thing that can be misleading too is when we talk about meeting class size, in order to meet class size at one school, their kindergarten may be at 12, 15 kids, where at another school, we may be at 18 across the board in kindergarten. So it doesn't take many of those scenarios to skew those numbers.
Lecanto High School's really gonna lose 13 units?
Well, that's the proposal, if you look at what
They're up to
the
8 right
staffing.
now.
I mean, they,
that they-
Lecanto is the lowest I have seen it since I've been here. I mean, they're just at 1,500, and typically, we know,
Yeah.
you go throughout the year, they
It was
they'll
1,800.
fall. Used to be over 1,800,
Yeah.
right?
When we had the concrete rules.
What units be, where will they be?
All over.
Yeah, I mean, it's across the board. I mean, and that's what we actually met with Lecanto High on Friday, discussing this, and what's the planning and how we're gonna get to this number. Looking at their class schedule and class requests and remediation. I mean, we have so much to take into account to try to hit that number. Sometimes you hit it, sometimes you don't. I mean, but that, if you look at the formula, that's what it says.
But
Then
what
you gotta
they're,
look at reality.
what they're proposing, they would lose units across the board. Electives, social studies, science, English, math, across the board.
Now, high schools aren't final yet, well, no school's final yet, but high schools, they're just now getting their course request in, so once they get that in, then, staff will go back out and meet with them again based on the request from the students. And I think when Ms. Deutschman brought that up about the, online courses, that's what we're looking at right now, because like I said, we've got chemistry classes out there that are finishing up with 6 kids. We can't afford that anymore, so if that's a course that we can put on, maybe not that course, but some of these courses, we pretty well told the principals, you need to either have these teachers recruit kids in those classes, or we may have to go to one teacher in the district to teach that course.
Can I ask you, kind of piggybacking on that train of thought with online, FTE, we lose FTE with an online course that's outside of the Citrus County system.
So we're
Considering,
thinking about having our
I was
own
gonna
teacher,
say, if-
and we
can we
video that
do
teacher.
that?
Right, correct.
and then we
That
can
would be
pull those
us.
FTE dollars in, we can
Right.
meet the mandate, the legislative mandate that students have to
That
have
would be
that.
with Florida Online or anything.
So we
else,
can
that would be us.
keep that internal,
Kids
that
go to-
income opportunity
Kids go to virtual
internal.
school on their own, we lose that.
Well, then,
Now we also have a blended learning lab now that
Yeah.
we're doing, and we pay Florida Virtual a contractual rate. That's not the entire FTE, so we don't lose it all. We lose the majority of it, 3/4 of it. But if we go to doing our own, then we would get the entire FTE.
so looking at that initiative and moving that in a direction, I mean, it'd be pretty easy to do an analysis of the climate right now, looking at history. What is the #1 most requested online course? And then competing against that to try to get those FTE dollars back. And we could easily see how much that could potentially.
Driver's ed is actually their #1 course.
Not
And it's
online.
online, but and it's exempt.
But I'm looking at FTE dollars that would make an impact. So anyway, I'm looking, I know we've got a painful piece here in front of us to look at.
So I think
I'm
we're
looking at
actually
angles to
budgeting
increase.
losing about 60 FTE next year to virtual school. Is
Well,
what
it'd be nice if we could compete against virtual school internally.
Well, we have so many competing factors out there, virtual, private, vouchers, charters, I mean,
I
we're
know.
all over the map, so.
Yeah, there are a lot of
The other
competing
thing
factors.
about the virtual schools is that they're required to take one, they would like for them to be required to take 2 before they graduate. And, I don't think we offer the kind of courses that they can just get a credit in. They've been encouraged to take driver's ed, and there was another one,
And that only worked for one group, because then the state came in and said that couldn't count as your online course.
oh, okay.
So now it's the internet safety course,
Social media.
the social media course that is being pushed.
Anyway, if I develop an online English course here, and we offer it here, that would count. I think defining what legislation regards as online, if we do the Skype, that's online, and we can do,
Not a virtual.
I think there's a
There's a
wiggle
clear
room for opportunity to
definition.
actually earn some
There's a
FTE
clear
dollars.
definition on how it has to be.
Yeah, it's not in our favor, that's for sure, because we tried that. We
It's
had the
just,
citrus,
yeah,
didn't
it
we
was-
have citrus virtual?
We would do this mainly because we don't have enough students in for requesting from all 3 high schools. But if we get enough course requests from all 3 high schools, then we'll look at doing something like
But
that.
it would kind of be a
the timing
hybrid
of the
with
course
traditional
be?
virtual.
Well, it'd be a remote class, so you
Right,
could have.
that's right.
During the
you
day,
could have
I
all
can
the
see it.
kids.
Hybrid,
Better.
hybrid virtual.
No, it
hybrid
would be
virtual.
a real-time
The weekday.
class. We had this demonstrated to us once before, it's a real-time
Yes.
class, the kids sit in front of their computer, the teacher is somewhere else. You can either type in the questions, and the questions will come up on the screen in front of the teacher and everybody else at the moment. They can communicate and post their questions right up, or maybe they have a headset and they can talk. Mike, can they do like a come to my meeting, wherever, where the teacher could have a camera on all the kids and have them on the screens, and they'd all be looking at each other?
Typically, it's been a camera on the teacher and kind of a camera collectively on the classroom. I guess you could do like a WebEx where whenever a kid's speaking, it would be their picture on the screen. We use that for, web conferencing, that kind of thing. But that would that would presume a kid in front of a computer with a, camera on that particular computer.
Well, have you
so.
ever gone, what is it, go to my meeting or
Go to
something?
meeting.
Yeah, go to meeting, yeah,
So,
sure.
you could have maybe 20 participants,
Correct.
everybody is always on camera.
But in those scenarios, those 20 participants are usually in different locations. They're not all in one room, so.
But they could be sitting in, if you had students in a computer lab, then those 10 students or 5 students would be appearing
Yep, technically,
virtually, and the other kids would be in the classroom. I mean, I don't think the kids on the screen need to see the kids in the classroom.
You're
They all
saying-
just need to see the teacher, and the teacher needs to see all of them.
technically that.
So you're
could be
talking a
done.
webinar type more situation as opposed to that conferencing room situation.
Yeah, because I think the teacher needs to be looking at each individual student, eye contact, paying attention, asking questions, being able to respond is really important, and that's what you lose when you go to a virtual reality rather
So
than.
interesting, it's a little different, it twists on what I think you guys did.
But in the go-to-meeting, the teacher still would only see one student at a time, usually the one speaking.
No,
not
you
the-
see everybody at one time. Unfortunately, sometimes for some people, you do see them all the time, and they're doing all kinds of things. They're not listening, and they're getting up, and
Yeah, I think on the
not dressed appropriately.
the instructor module, they can all come up, and then I think even there's the ability of having the class where all the class students come up as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, what they do is if you don't want to be on camera all the time, you just eliminate your little camera, stick it over.
And speaking of that, I'd like to thank Mr. Geddes because I did a go-to-meeting last week and we were down to the wire. Something was wrong with the computer. I couldn't get into the class. And probably about 30 seconds before I was supposed to be in there, he fixed it, I got in there, took the course. It was a really great experience, I really appreciate that. And let me, while I'm thinking of it, I don't want to interrupt what we're doing, but the people, I was talking with in Tallahassee, asked that we have something from Citrus County side that we're doing, where you recognizing the teachers and the students and everything for their exceptional contributions. So if I could get something from you to take up there next week to the meeting, I will share it with my go-to-meeting group. Thank you.
Most impressed, Ms. Powers, that you did that.
Oh, I'm there, I'm telling you.
Hey, that's
Mr. Kennedy, since you've come aboard, I'm there. It says call
You've
midnight.
If I may, I know we're talking a lot about virtual and are doing our virtual. I know Mr. Clark's been working on some of those ideas, so if he could give you an update, maybe that.
Thank you.
Mr. Potter, I'm gonna come, you took a little card again this year.
Good morning.
You have a little card.
Yes, ma'am. Dates of interest, yes.
Yes.
Good morning, members of the school board, Superintendent Ms. Himmel, Superintendent Mr. Mullen. I've heard a little bit about the conversation. What we are doing through our delivery of that blended learning lab is to identify a course in regards to what they could actually have and take in order to satisfy that requirement. I kind of heard the conversation before I came downstairs about if we were to actually have a course being taught in a school, let's say Crystal River High School, and they're doing an AP course, could they then Skype that into the other two schools to basically consolidate that group? I would basically have to check as far as would that still meet the letter of the law as far as the online requirement being met, because there's a point at which there's that distance, we've got the distance, but as far as would they basically be able to complete assignments outside this or any time, that teacher would have to be available beyond the 4 o'clock or beyond the 3:30 time period. That, I think, constitutes that requirement for online. If our teachers are only here for the 7 3/4 day, then we would expect that there be phone calls, emails that are going to be responded to in that time period after school. That's really, I think, the essence of the question is, would then that actually meet the letter of the law as far as the online course?
I think we were actually looking at it, not to fulfill that requirement. I mean, if it did, it would be great. But really,
I
in
see.
order to consolidate,
Like the physics.
Well, yeah, and we did have two avenues, definitely two different
Okay.
avenues. My thought process was regaining the lost FTE due to the state
Okay.
mandate
I'm
of
sorry.
the online course that kids are required to take now.
Yes.
So you're definitely answering the question that I had in my mind, this hybrid that we're creating, or the thought processes that are being bounced around, would that meet state statute? Would we at that point earn the FTE dollars that are being lost? And with that said, how much will that impact our budget in the long haul? When down the road, they'll probably be requiring even more online courses. So
Correct.
I think the energy of coming up with positive ideas that can help bring money in, and again, focusing in on hard decisions that have to be done now, but looking at the long range of where we can grow and go with, focusing in on things that we can do.
One of the things that I have learned about the online portion is that really you need folks that are familiar with online instruction. It's very unique. And then also that the curriculum is best to be served by looking at what Florida Virtual currently has in place. Schools that we've gone through, we've gone over to Seminole County, talked with their group, basically said, don't reinvent the wheel. Florida Virtual has gone through a lot of work in order to be able to generate that curriculum that is conducive to that type of learning. And so then you would basically be purchasing that portion of the curriculum, but then again, looking at your own staff in order to be delivering that. And that was our plan, is actually to go in the next step of get our feet wet with it this semester to find out, and then hopefully try to get some folks on board to actually either deliver one of the courses that are similar to the Florida Virtual, whether that be the language arts or the Algebra 1. We hadn't really talked about the specifics on it.
As far as our agreement with Seminole, am I correct that our FTE cost is substantially less if they use Seminole, but Seminole's only for the for the full-time equivalent. I mean, it's only for a full-time student, not for the a la carte Florida virtual.
That's right. Through Seminole, that's what we use for our virtual.
And there isn't a, because of that cost effectiveness of Seminole, they don't have an a la carte.
And I think it is a la carte when they go straight to the virtual school itself.
No, but I'm thinking that the cost is, I think, a little more advantageous for us with Seminole.
I believe so.
So I'm thinking, I wonder if, you know, is there an opportunity there for that? And I guess maybe the other, really where that's going is, we have the requirement, but what we know is we have a substantial number of students that go well beyond that in the use of virtual, other than just the required one single course. A lot of them are taking those advanced courses, physics being, for example, that one. That, you know, is there an opportunity to go to Seminole to say, listen, we'd like to be able to have those other courses being offered? I know we can't prohibit students from going to Florida Virtual, but it may be a way where the guidance department then can guide them into that.
And is there an opportunity for AP classes?
Is it? Okay.
Claudia?
I think I heard.
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
No, you were asking that, and I was just adding to it. AP classes too, is there an opportunity to have the AP classes online and they receive college credit?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah,
Whether they take it with us or with Florida Virtual, they still are going to get
I
the
was thinking
same.
with us, and we could get the, you know, the monies
If
and,
they take classes, we don't offer like Japanese and
Sure.
stuff like
you know.
that.
Yeah.
Language, even French.
This is a big monster to explore. I mean, there are a lot of questions being generated right now that would help drive a workshop or drive some investigation, but I think looking for the biggest bang for the buck, I love the thinking outside of the box to help give additional courses like the calculus and the physics an opportunity to reach more students through the ideas that they've shared with Skyping. I think that's a wonderful reach. Also looking at trying to keep the bleeding, or at least slow the bleeding down with the loss of FTE that's currently going out to those online courses outside of Citrus County. So with that said, identifying the biggest bang for the buck that can be recouped when it comes to trying to identify where it sounds like there's an interest in developing our own in-house FTE formula funded online program, but what should we really focus on? Every single kid has to take the core subjects. We have electives that would spread the dollars in the warm bodies, but everybody has to take those core subject areas. So with that said, I know we have talent within the district, some of which have actually worked for Florida Virtual School. Those folks can be tapped. My own son took English online just because Mama wanted to see what it was about. So I definitely understand the flexibility and the enticement that drives Florida Virtual School's bottom line. We've got a lot here to digest, a lot of research to be done, and I appreciate the fact that you came down here so quickly to help answer some of the questions.
We have talked about this virtual education within Citrus County, and we've really, as you know, we attempted it one time. You still have some of those same challenges. Who's going to watch those students? They have to be monitored. We're actually now using, at one of our schools, we're actually using our media center for that blended learning model that we're doing right now. So it's not, we have tried, we've actually set up the televisions in both of the locations. It's just something we still need to actually work on, because there's the assignments, how that's going to communicate it, and there's a lot of components that are to that. But that was the one thing that I basically run up against. You still need a staff member in order to be able to watch those students.
I wondered though too, Mark, if as Ms. Deutschman was talking about, because I've always thought when we were talking about this, we were talking about like conference rooming. I know Rathbun College uses that format on a regular basis, where they'll be teaching in Ohio and then having at their school they've got I actually have 2 cameras in the back of the room that go into the students so that anything that goes on in the room. And I think that's how we ran that test. But I think the interesting thing is, I don't know that we looked at it as almost a webinar type broadcast. Not, again, because it wouldn't meet, I think, the standard for the virtual course. But it's not what you think, but still would meet the objective of, I got 10 students over here, and if we were using areas like the media centers, we could potentially not have, we could mitigate that cost, that additional cost of that aid having to be in a room, because they would be sitting at a terminal, as opposed to sitting in a room with 10 kids and then having to have a para in there. So I think is interesting, because again, we're talking about smaller numbers, of what that is. And there's still logistics involved, but I was thinking the same thing. I've always thought we were talking about having another room that we were broadcasting. It may be actually simpler and more cost effective to do it, that the students at the other satellite schools are using a terminal to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Can I just ask any college kid now, every college student, especially freshmen, how many of them are taking real-time courses? Not that many. I know a lot of students stay home, and they take all their classes, their virtual classes, with their professor, but
Yeah.
they're home, they're
Well,
not in school. It's
You're
kind of
right.
scary.
You're
In their
right.
pajamas.
You're right, and UF has a grant. They've been funded to develop a total virtual campus. So a student who graduates from our system that is enrolled in the virtual UF campus never has to step foot on that campus, and it's an amazing process. But that's, like you guys are being proactive, that's what we're dealing with. So I definitely
But-
appreciate the efforts to get us there.
I didn't think that we would need and meet disciplinary problems that we're actually experiencing right now
Mhm.
with blended learning.
What does that mean?
That basically if a teacher is not in that classroom and the students are actually communicating with their student virtually, there's things that the respect for basically coming back and saying, okay, this assignment isn't correct. We need to redo it. No, I'm good with it. That whatever I submitted, it's good. No, you need to actually redo that. So again, that's why we're saying there's some things we're experiencing that I did not.
Well, and that's another.
And that's why I'm glad those teachers are actually in those classrooms, because they know how to actually work through some of that. But we're just finishing up this blended learning that just last week, 9 weeks, 90 minutes a period, and we still don't have some students done with a half-credit course. We've had to extend over. So again, I just kind of share that with you, is that those are things I did not anticipate that we're now experiencing. We're giving them some extensions, some opportunity to be able to complete those work, but it's a requirement, and again, identifying what those courses are.
and Mark, we've then entailed the cost of that as well, because we've got the cost of the computer that we're maintaining, the
That's the point.
discipline and the cost then of the, of whatever aide or teacher or whoever, and still then losing the FTE.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to that. We're in a budget kind of planning workshop, and so we're talking about virtual education, certainly big place in public education and higher education at this point in time, but I don't think you can ever assume that you're going to see a lot of cost savings through virtual education. Every study, if you talk to Florida Virtual, they will talk about the incredible expense it's cost them to develop each course. They realize that back in economy of scale that we'll never realize, as a public school district. So I think it's great. We need the conversation for Florida, for virtual education, virtual classrooms. But I don't really think we need to be thinking about that in terms of cost savings, because as Mr. Kennedy just pointed out, their infrastructure costs, their software costs, license costs, are additional costs that you still have to contend with, so you'll never see that net difference of zero.
So you're saying there'll never be a gain. So the bleeding that we have with the loss of the FTE dollars going toward the online program now is a reoccurring cost factor, so to speak, that we should truly plan for instead of trying to offset or compete against it.
I don't think we can.
We can't compete. Okay.
I just want to put that in perspective.
Well, I appreciate that.
Back to the question, why are we talking about virtual? And there's a lot of good reasons for it. I don't know that necessarily saving money is going to be.
But you keep saving money of $100,000 on those WAM bids, and you know,
Right.
you could keep funding it for us.
Every 3 years.
Before Mr. Blocker goes, and I don't know his head, but
I don't know where I'm going.
he's not going.
Yeah.
Just a couple things I've written down, so we can bring this information back to you all, is that we're gonna take the number of administrators and core staff in each school, elementary and high school, and compare it to the number of instructional units. That's one. We're gonna pursue Ms. Deutschman's webinar class, because we've done the other type, so we'll get some information on that. We're gonna compare the 1 mile versus 2 mile ridership, and we're waiting on our map from Maryland, so we can tell you where they're coming from. And then a list of items, and you don't need to vote on this, but I was saying it'd be nice if Mr. Kennedy and I came up with a list, or we come up with a list of items that we'd like to present to the Education Foundation, put it in letter form, and you and I both sign it on behalf of the board. And say these are a bunch of things, and we'll come up with a large list, because they're going out to big corporations to ask them to fund other things.
Okay, and I have one more thing to add to that. Listen, while you're looking at administrator to student, can we look at total cost per student at each school?
Yes.
I have
We
that
have
budget,
that.
You have that, I
Yeah,
think.
we'll consolidate all that.
but I'll put it all together.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I guess the big question is, once we,
Well, where are we going with that is maybe what I think you're,
Well, here's where we're going with it. I think it's just it's the same thing as when we looked at our facilities. We looked at our facilities from a much bigger global perspective, and we looked at each facility and we had specific criteria. It gave us a completely different picture about the needs of those schools compared to what was coming from the inside out. Some of the people on the inside were telling us what was wrong with our schools, but when we did a comparison and analysis, we found out that there was some better understanding of facilities, better use of facilities by people. So I'm wondering if when we look at this per student cost, we might look at some schools are more efficient with the way they use their staff. Maybe some schools staff that differently. I know when I walk through elementary schools, from one elementary school to another, it's completely different how they group kids. Some have large classes with 2 or 3 or 4 instructional staff based on if they have inclusion and they have 2 aides or whatever. Some schools do it completely different. So maybe there's something to be learned by comparing one school that might be more efficient with a similar number of enrollment. I don't know.
well, that goes to me back to, and I guess that was a question I would say to the board, do we have direction on, and that is classroom size amendment. Because that, to me, is the use of those classroom teachers, the way we do the inclusion has a tremendous different effect from one school to another on those numbers. And I think inclusions had to take that, principals have had to use that as their overflow, whether they liked it or not.
How they deliver gifting.
And how they did all of
You know,
those
all
pieces.
those extra things that have different, you know, we need to have this person, and the other school doesn't have the person at all. Why is that? You know, which is a better model?
And I'm not sure, Mr. Mullen, that I was sure one way or the other if you thought there was more benefit to going down exploring, having a school average, meaning like we identified, okay, we could, maybe 3 units is what we're identifying now, but the question I think is there, because of the way the culture's gotten, because of the culture, the way they've had to meet the challenge, they're doing things, but like high school changes, I think, dramatically if we provide that.
Honestly, with the high school, we're meeting class size first term,
We're not,
anywhere
yeah.
close to it second term. But that's the only time they're looking at it is first term.
We talk about part-time instructors too, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
we're using that, we're doing that. We have one science teacher that works half a year at Citrus High. Where we can do that, we're trying to do that. We've even talked about if we have to half-time at one school and then the other semester.
I think that's a great, yeah.
Physics teacher.
But I will tell you, the evaluation system in the BAM makes those things difficult to do. You can't.
and certification, we're looking at.
The certifications at this high school is the game. But I guess the question is not wanting to have, because you've got a lot here, and I don't want to add work that won't go anywhere.
I think there is some value in looking at averages, school averages, and The reason I say that is because we have many inequities now trying to meet class size where we have,
Right.
because that kindergartner came in, now we have 12 in a kindergarten class at one school and 18 in a kindergarten class at another.
Right.
That's an inequity in itself as well.
Because I believe when we went from the school average to the hard classroom, and we get allocated, if I recall, funding from the state at that time, they allocated a couple of million, I think, during that time. They've taken that stuff away from
We're
us,
up to
but
like 15 million in class size.
in the classroom. So, and I think that was one of the steps at that point. So my curiosity was always, is it really costing us that? And even if it was costing us half that, that's a lot to our district.
And I was always told, I never looked at the research myself, but the numbers that they chose arbitrarily, 18, 22, 25, really aren't the numbers, if you really want to affect the instruction,
Mhm.
is not the numbers that should be used, so.
They're absolutely not.
Yeah, they're just arbitrary numbers.
The other question I have, and I know when we're building that list, the .25, is that something that we want to speak about, talk about going back? Because I know we're going to be running up against some deadlines for Mr.
When is our deadlines?
I believe it has to be in front, if I remember, memory serves me right, it has to be in front of the county commission in May for them to approve to be to the supervisor elections by June, if I remember the.
That failed my last time.
60, I can look it up here. I think it was 60-something%.
So there's a large gap that we have to make up in order to get approval.
I think the secret is finding how many amendments are on the ballot.
Yeah,
That's true.
One of the things I think that is the problem is that what we're doing and asking right now, the public is going to want to have seen that we have made this true effort to say the need is great. Now, we all know, I think, we have that comfortability to say that, but it's a lot different than having to sell that to show them. We've again asked these questions.
I think it's a harder sell this time because, in fact, I just heard this morning or on the news, all the schools have gotten, at least a minimum of a, 2-3% increase or whatever over last year. So I think people would have, a question as to then why do you need all this extra money if you're getting extra money? And it's certainly in a gubernatorial election year, you're not gonna hear people like the governor tell you that he's reduced funding to education. He's increased it so much.
Right.
And we would be competing with that message saying, we're behind. So there's either something wrong with us, or he's not telling the truth. So,
Well, I think we've identified, we have a couple of small schools, 3, Renaissance, Thomas S. and Floral City, that are very high cost brick and mortar to maintain and to operate based on the students that are there, the number of the students. I mean, those are costing you a tremendous amount of money.
I just think it'd be a real tough sell this time, much harder than last time. And we may get some reprieve on the .25, being able to do by supermajority the levy for capital, which would help us tremendously since we lost all the money from Duke.
Yes.
56%, 56.73% voted no. And
it was in a horrible spot.
It wasn't.
it was a horrible spot.
There are a lot of variables there. I think based on Duke, as far as sales pitch, I think the climate is favorable to be able to recoup that levied amount. But I looking at that staffing plan, I want to make sure we don't box our administrators in, because so much of the variation throughout the district really comes down to the talents of the staff. When you've got a staff member that is very talented and can wear 2 or 3 different hats, and you'll see a lot of variation, and so much of it is based on the needs of the students and the talents of the staff. And I would caution us to not box in with a formula that needs to be. I think the idea of looking at best practices and sharing those is wonderful, and I know that district-wide that happens routinely, sharing best practices. I just want to be careful as far as assuming that there's one formula for success based on the way one or two or more schools are doing their staffing formula. So with that said, I'm ready to move
Well,
on.
their staff reform is all the same, we have it in front of us.
That's what I'm saying, but when
They're already
they're
boxed in.
day-to-day operations, we don't wanna tighten it any, to the point where they're not able to tap the talents.
Is there any direction, thought of us doing an exercise, maybe looking at a Renaissance and what we would do as an alternative when we came back to you and said, we can save $1 million and here's what we're gonna do as an alternative? I mean, I just throw that out there because we gotta get to some of these hard questions, and I hate to be the one to start asking them, but we gotta get to this point. Same with Homosassa
But we're not looking for $3 million.
And Floral City.
and Floral City.
I think we're looking at what's manageable.
It says the graduate of Homosassa, by the way. I'm sorry, Ms. Deutschman, I just want to
Right.
make sure.
Within the scope of what we're doing already, we're looking for a relatively small amount of money that we need to recoup, not a large amount of money. We, at one point, were looking for $5 or $6 million in savings, and I think that would have been the time to have addressed those issues. I don't think this kind of budget shortfall calls for those kind of drastic measures, at least that's my opinion.
Well, just remember, and as I go back, and I can point that out to you, what we're projecting is merely to bring us back even for operations. It doesn't address your FT shortfall, your fund balance shortfall, any type of increases in Duke. So, I mean, just keep that in mind when we're looking at that number.
How much would it cost for us to put it on the ballot?
How much does it cost us?
Oh, you're talking about the .25?
Yep.
I think it's just your attorney staff
Yeah.
time.
I think we need to do it, we need to have it strategically placed this time, not after a bajillion no.
I don't, yeah, I was gonna say, I think that it's by statute how it's determined of its placement, but if there's less amendments, that's, that in and of itself
You could
is.
be right after medical marijuana,
Oh, you're right.
because that's going on the ballot. I don't know what else is, but that one definitely has, that
Yeah.
Some kind of gaming will be on there.
gaming will be on, I don't remember what, I haven't heard any of those, but marijuana definitely will be.
If the board moves forward with the .25, I think we need to have, individually, I think we need to use some conversation with the Educational Foundation and some of our, and that group to see what we can do to get their help in promoting. That, as we know, has been the most successful in other counties. I tend to tell you, while I absolutely believe a .25 is something that I would have not only no problem, I believe very much that I would support, both as a voter, but I am concerned that in this climate, it's gonna be another tough challenge.
You've got drugs, you've got gambling, why not education?
Well, that's why I say, I'm not willing to put it on, I'm just being realistic that I just don't know that it'll get where we're going. But I'm certainly supportive to say that if the rest of the board is on board with that. But I think what we learned last time is we still have got to be more organized in that message. Because
I'm just saying, if you
Yeah.
say it's gonna go through operations with just teacher pay, and the governor told everybody they're getting a $2,500 raise last year, by God, you were gonna say, you just got $2,500, why am I paying money for your raise? You got $2,500 last year.
And my question to you is, find a teacher that got that amount of money.
Well, that's another story, people don't, that's the general.
Find me a teacher that got that kind of money and I'll agree with you.
Common knowledge isn't that they didn't get that kind of money because it never was funded. But, you know, that's an explanation that you have to make. I don't think that most people on the street would not say, oh yeah, the teachers got the raise.
it's an emotional decision. It's not a thought-provoking, research-based decision that I think the voter makes on the .25. And the first time, it was for the kids.
Well,
And-
this time it was also, it was for property.
And it was for
People
capital.
understood that.
And we also went through, had just lost it, and could make a very easy case of how the shell game had played. The second time, it was tougher.
Right,
Kenny, wasn't it on the ballot, the governor's race last month?
no. Oh, the first time?
The
First time it
I
was,
mean, that's
yes.
the first time.
Yes.
Mhm. 2010.
So,
But the perception, she's correct, it's that we got all this money from the governor.
No,
Why in
2010.
the world would you ask for any more?
2002, because they sunset.
so Ms. Hemlin, I think you you've outlined the list of our to-dos, I think is what.
Good with that, 'cause a lot of this we already have.
But I guess I'm still asking that question. Anything else you want us to explore and bring back to you? Because
Well, Renaissance, I guess, goes back to that question, and I would say the same thing or I'm asking the board. What Mr. Mullen has said on the curriculum side, and Mr. Blocker saying on the money side is, we're functioning at Renaissance. And as Ms. Bryant would say, and they're out of the classroom, so that's a good thing. But I think the objectives that this board has desired for Renaissance, less transition, because transition is, I think on its own, is being successful because of that format. Are we doing that? And it may not be that the conversation is simply about this budget cycle, but about how we do look at Renaissance. And we've had this conversation about Renaissance pretty much since I've been here of what is Renaissance? Is it a school for transition? Is it a school for behavioral? Is it a school for, academic, rehabilitation? And, what is Renaissance? Because I think right now, Renaissance purpose is to get kids out of the classroom.
what's the objective?
And I think at this point, that's very good, but it is costing us to accomplish that at an average of 60 kids a day? Is that roughly,
Well, I mean, we have more enrolled, but if you're talking about that.
I'm talking about average attendance.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but we don't get paid on attendance, we get paid on.
We get paid on, yeah. That's a good point, Ms. Deutsch.
But we staff on enrollment, and that the kids aren't there. I mean, you really have almost like a one-to-one. You have an administrative staff that's almost the same as an elementary. So we need to look at the entire picture. And what is the objective, and are we meeting the objective?
What would your suggestion be for an alternative? I mean, I can see.
Well, we talked last year about bringing it back to the schools like it
Yeah.
originated.
Yeah, and I was tuned in.
And then there's gonna have to be a decision made, not by me, but by the board, is do we expel more of them?
Middle school, as we know, is always the case. There's been a suggestion I've heard at times too of, do you take and, again, we've talked about this, the expansion of like a 3rd, 4th, 5th grade scenario where they go into Renaissance. Now, right now, we obviously don't have the staff to accomplish that. But what if it was 3rd, 4th, 5th, and middle school Renaissance was? And high school, we took a different approach on. Do we gain anything by taking that approach?
Don't know that answer.
Well, and I don't even know if we're interested in it. But
And then we've
I
had,
think the question is is that we don't want to run Renaissance the way we're running it now, and we're doing that for economic reasons. But is it, and I think we all see value in Renaissance. And I think that probably, we want to make sure that we do make it clear. The value isn't that, it's, should we be doing more? And until we do that, what do we do? Because the way we're running it right now is concerning, it sounds like the way you're saying is I hate to say it, but are we housing kids?
Well, you can't teach children till you can get their attention or get them to behave. We continue to try to maintain their academics. We have more academic resources than we do counseling resources at Renaissance. Their behavior is what needs to be corrected. In most cases, then the academics. We're trying to do both at the same time, but focus on academics, and that's not being real successful.
And if we had a choice, we'd focus on the behavior, but we're having to focus
If I
on the
had my
academic.
choice, we would
Mhm.
concentrate on the
But
behavior and
because
social
of
skills.
rules.
But, unfortunately, they still have to be given X amount of credits, and it's hard to do both in a 6-hour day. So we tend to try to do both, and we do both not as well as we could just concentrate on.
And we know how to do it. We have the personnel that could do it. Again, we have the problem with the fewer number of students in the money.
We have a 10 o'clock certain coming up, so I guess what I'm gonna ask is if we have direction on Renaissance that we would like to give, and I'm gonna go down from Miss Bryant, because you always have the great one-line, response. Is there any direction we wanna give different at this moment with Renaissance.
Nothing different except maybe raise the fences.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Balfour, do you have any new thoughts on that too?
Yeah, just listening to the statements being made about how it's being operated now, and the fact that we need to focus in on more behavior instruction and intervention. Recognizing that the facility itself has a cost. What would we do with that? I'm just looking at all these different scenarios. What would we do with that building?
Well, there's been several different thoughts on what we could use for that building, but I mean, we would be, the operations we suspended, the building would be, you know, there vacant for now, but there's been talk about moving different scenarios, like maybe, and I hate to even say this because people are gonna start conjuring these ideas, so I
think what that would be is if we gave direction, that would be questions that we would need to have answers to. That's I mean, I do think that's an important question.
maybe that's part of the.
That would have to be part of that conversation if we went forward.
In order to give direction, and there's, when you have questions, so I guess the direction, I'm asked to give direction would be to explore and have a deeper understanding of the ramifications of the decision if the movement was to try.
Pluses, minuses, alternatives.
Right, the pros and cons, definitely. I just need more information. That would be my suggestion.
Okay.
When we asked the question last year, all the teachers quit because they said, oh, you're closing the school. So you have to be really careful.
Oh, and I understand that, but we need to ask questions to make an educated decision as well.
I guarantee you, within 15 minutes, the buzz is gonna be going around that school that we're gonna close the Renaissance, right? You're gonna get a phone call at least.
We'll get more than
Yeah.
that. Let me just say one thing, I'm not trying to skew what you tell us here, but when we looked at able to offer the model we offer now back at the school, you're still gonna need the same amount of staff, only you're gonna have it at 4 schools. So
Right.
to me, the question is, do you wanna have an alternative to expulsion program, or do you not wanna have an alternative to expulsion program? Because you'd have to be willing to expel more kids if you don't have that program. So it's not, we can tell you we'll house it at the school, that's not really gonna work, it's not gonna really save you money.
And I think that is critical to say, and Ms. Powers, I want to give you an opportunity.
No, what you're saying is absolutely correct. If Renaissance does not exist, then those students have to be expelled from the school system, they're out. And if they're out, they're not learning anything, there's not an alteration in their behavior, there's no input from people in guidance, in counseling, to help them find a better path. So in other words, we're throwing them out the door. And I don't see how a school system can do that for students who, although they've misbehaved or taken the wrong path, they have not done something horrendously horrible. So there has to be something in place, because I don't think we're callous enough to take and start just expelling people as fast as we can expel them. And then the program that you talked about, the drug program, is working. It's working well, so that needs to continue. So we have to find a solution in terms of Renaissance to be able to service the students that are misbehaving and to service the kids who do get in trouble with drugs. It cannot just be, okay, shut it down and let them do it on their own, throw them out of school. It cannot be that. I want to see more services given to those students, not less services given to the students, but I'm a realist knowing that we have to think in a way that's a creative way, and I think that we can do it. There are enough people in this county who can come up with ideas to be able to help, to be able to have a system such as Renaissance going and fund it in a different way. And I have seen funding like that in other states where the whole community was funded by, actually the whole community, different parts of the community, and it worked. We have to explore that, we have to do that, and we have to get on the stick and do it. So.
I don't know how we got on this conversation of the Renaissance.
Well, I asked the question, I mean.
He asked the
Yeah,
question.
but
It's his fault.
Well, because somebody brought it up, but I think we need to look again at the cost per student of all schools, at all programs. Renaissance doesn't stand out to me as any different than any other school. We are a public school system, and we are required by law to provide education to the students in this community, regardless of their behavior and their learning needs and their disabilities and their abilities. So that's why we have the Renaissance.
Exactly.
And that need is never gonna go away. So I think what we really need to do is look at the best use of our money to delivering the highest quality instructional program with the best results, which is what we've always been very good at. Till we ran out of money and we really stretched our dimes thin. I just hope this isn't gonna last very much longer.
Me too.
But I think, it's never a bad idea to start going back and doing some comparisons and best practices and looking at staffing to see, is there something we're missing? Somebody's got a good idea that we can share around. We've learned that before from other people in our own school system that have really good ideas.
And I appreciate that, for the purpose, because I have experienced this and gone down this. I want to make it clear that I think that what Renaissance is doing, and I think this conversation will continue to do, has been so admirable, especially with the situation that we did reduce the staff and make the mission more challenging. What I want to I think I would tune in to see, and I think it's largely the same consensus as the rest of the board members, is not as much about maybe this budget cycle as much as I think we really have to look at how Renaissance, we continue to build that mission stronger. It was purposeful to strip, reduce the amount of staff down to where it was, because we knew, I think we were accomplishing what was the case this year. But I think now we have an opportunity to start looking at what can we do to improve that, because I don't think this board, there's certainly times where I believe we definitely have to expel, and when Renaissance has brought to us expulsions from their school this year, I have been much more willing, because of their situation, to say, if they don't have the staff to deal with it the way they did, and we've got to honor that. But at the same time, I have trouble saying to a middle schooler, a senior in high school, and some of the many other situations, that I want to just not provide them that education and opportunity. So again, so Renaissance people don't get panicked. I think that this board has not said that we're suggesting do anything different at this moment.
Or the other little schools.
Or the other little schools. But I'm thinking, because Renaissance, we were asking for direction on that. I do think, though, we have to have a conversation as to where we're going to staff Renaissance, and where does that fit into that mission. Because as right now, we're running at bare bones, and we're accomplishing what we're paying for. We're keeping students out of the other schools. Minus transition, and again, transition, what the general public doesn't understand is, it's a program in and of itself. It's been very successful, and it operates quite, I think, economically affordable with the mission that it does, so.
And I'll just point out, many of the teachers out there teaching we talk about differentiated instruction. They're really differentiated when they have 9 through 12th grade English in one classroom. So, they are very challenged in what we're asking them to do, and they do a good job. They work very hard at it. It's just that, they don't have a lot of resources at their disposal to make a difference, a real difference.
So I think that we've kind of all said that. I think, Ms. Balfour, your suggestion too is we still want to get some information, though. But I don't know that we're saying it's going to change anything in this budget cycle, which is, I think the feedback you were seeking, not necessarily the answer, the right answer for maybe what you had hoped it would fix one thing. Not that you were wanting to close it down, but just that you wanted direction. So is that?
So, yeah, so I think, Ms. Owen, you got the list of the to-dos, and knowing that the next budget workshop will not be to the end of April, so we'll certainly bring you back.
I think as we have some of these conversations, and I guess I'm asking you and the board, if we find that there is something we need to act on, I think we need to, or discussions. The thing I don't know that we gave direction on one way or the other is, did we want to give direction on the .25 at this point for them to start working on that or not?
I'm for it.
I'm for it.
But I don't know if the climate is right now, so I need to think a little bit about that myself,
I think you already said your climate's concerned.
I don't think you want people telling you no twice.
I'm concerned about that myself. I want it to be successful, And I just feel like there's some things outstanding now. This doesn't, I guess while I'm saying that, that doesn't necessarily mean that we still don't have time
Yeah.
to go forward. So I guess I'm saying to the board, while that's direction today, that doesn't necessarily, for
Right.
those that don't, we haven't decided anything here, other than to say, today, we're not gonna give you
Just
direction on
remember
that.
timeframe, you have to direct.
But we do need it by April.
We need to be able to have the flexibility. I mean, we can, in April, go a different.
We still, right, and are we still as a board okay with today not giving that direction, but we'll hold off until, I mean, meaning we're not closed.
Yeah, I assume April, Mr. Bradshaw.
April, I think, is we're gonna come into that period.
0.25.
The 0.25, when is gonna be our drop dead? If we didn't make that decision that day, we really aren't gonna be able to do that forward.
To move forward with like putting it on the ballot?
Yes.
I told him if memory served me right, I had to go to the county commission in May to be the supervisor elections by June.
Something like that, yeah.
So we could even have, if we, in discussion of our March meeting and discussion of our April meeting, we would still have time to put it on our agenda and have a special meeting the end of April to then get it to do that.
I would suggest sooner than later.
Yeah, I don't think the board's ready to do that.
No,
You're right. But I don't think we have enough consensus on that.
and if you want, I'll contact Ms. Gilman.
If you would, and so that we can get those dates so that we can, we know where we're going with that.
I can work backwards off that, because it does have to go in front of the county commission for tacit approval.
We have 10 o'clock. Mr. Blocker, is there anything else you needed from us? Sorry, 11 o'clock. Thank you, everyone.
One more, but,
I know.
And I will say, as we get these different items answered, we're going to bring them back to you, whether it's a workshop or a regular board meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're gonna take a 2-minute.
Oh,
I will not have anything.
They're not here yet? Oh, okay. Then-
Mr. Dodd,
There's no comment over board, workshop. It's not on the
well, we
Sorry,
We
sorry,
always
Mr. Dodd.
do.
We always do, we always honor that if someone wants to. It's not usually on the agenda, but we honor. I know we're in a tight problem right now.
That's something that we
11
did,
o'clock.
yeah, that we were. Oh,
Mr. Dodd, would you be sure that whatever question you have, that you give that question to a person that can help you answer it, because we don't want to not answer it for you.